what I'd really like to hear, if you guys can throw some things out to me that we can, things that, what issues that you're working with, that what you're doing that's working, what you're struggling with. I mean, that would be helpful. So anybody want to throw something out to get us started? Willing to?
Hi, this is Adriana, and one of the things that I was just dealing with, so I'm seeing the partner of a gambler, and one of my issues is just trying to help him understand that he's also mismanaging the money to an extent that it feels like he's gambling with the money. I mean, he's not doing the gambling, his partner is, but he does not have the level of awareness. So we went through the budgeting and what the meaning of money was for him, and he has had, in times in his life, he has had a pretty good, healthy amount of money with a good paying job, but that's all gone, and now he's taking money out of his retirement, and at this point he owes $17,000 to the IRS. So one of the interesting things that I was able to talk with him today is regarding the meaning of money for him, is that money brings family together, and because money is to be spent with loved ones, and to have fun things and to spend fun times. However, money has been an issue for the family, and so there has been a lot of conflict about money. So he used to work. So again, I'm working with a partner of the gambler, right? The gambling person.
Right.
But this person is showing some uncaring behavior with the money, and but money has been a source of conflict for the family. And interestingly enough, his mother and his stepfather have been gamblers forever. My client recalls times when he was a child, and he would drive with mom from California to Nevada to go to the casinos, and he was little, so basically he would stay at the buffet waiting for mom to be done with her gambling. And he keeps telling me that he never gambles, but his behavior towards money and his ideas about money show me, I mean, I'm very concerned about him. So I wonder if you have any ideas about how to get to the more family dynamics of it, because basically he says, well, money gets the family together, but then when we talk about other issues, all the hurt, all the conflict in the family is about money. So
so go ahead.
Yeah, so for instance, like my client filed for bankruptcy in 2008, and by that time, so he had a good job, a good paying job, and he said that he was having clients investing a lot of money in his company. And to make a long story short, then when he is let go, which he didn't want to expand on why he was let go, he started working for his parents, and his parents own a restaurant and an inn. So there was a lot of conflict with that because the gambling partner was not helping enough at work. But the funny thing is that, so there's the whole family involved with this business, and my client's brother basically took money from the parents. So there's a family history of not setting healthy boundaries around money and hurting each other. So part of me conceptualizes the case as if he were a gambler, but he's not. So I just don't know. I'm really worried about him, and I wonder if how I could help him gain some more awareness of how risky of a behavior he's having with money. He keeps taking a lot of money out of retirement. He doesn't want to lower his standard of living. He has a plane, a hangar, but doesn't have a pilot license, and that type of thing. So I wonder how I can help him gain some more insight about his risky behaviors around money.
Well, look back up. So he has a plane, he has an airplane in a hangar, but he doesn't have a pilot's license. Did I understand you correctly?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So what? Well, I mean, I got a number of questions, and I mean, you got a mess on your hands. That's my first response.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to know where to go with that. I guess put the airplane in the hangar without the pilot's license on hold, because that sounds like my initial response to that. It sounds like somebody who's also living in their fantasy world. But let me ask you, why is he seeing you?
Well, of course, he started seeing me because he wanted to see me because he was concerned about his relationship with his partner, and he wanted to figure out whether he's going to leave him or not. Okay,
so his partner is gambling,
right?
And is he married? Is this a partner that he's married to, or has? I mean, what's the financial connection between him and his partner?
Right. So this is a gay couple, and they've been together for 17 years. So they have a long history. They raised a child, so the child is not my client, but the partner. So yeah, they but he was letting me know today that he feels like he is always paying bills, and his partner is doing the gambling and basically.
Well, let me ask you this. You used the word, he feels like he's always paying the bills. That's either a fact or it's not. That's not a feeling. So in fact, is he paying the bills? In other words, is his partner gambling? I mean, do they have some kind of agreement where each one of them will contribute, a part or their money to a community pot? And is his partner, instead of doing that, gambling the money away so that he's left with the bills? I mean, is that how it's working?
Right. So basically for most of these 17 years, the partner has been gambling without contributing, right, financially to the couple. But then they started therapy. So I see the partner. There's another counselor who sees the gambler, and there's another counselor who sees the couple.
Okay.
So right now at this point, they have some sort of agreement in how much money each of them contributes to the family, to the couple. But now the gambler is not working. So, he's not able to contribute. So we're back into the pattern of,
Okay. So let me ask you this. So there's a number of clinicians involved in this, one for the gambler, one for the partner, which is you, and then somebody else seeing the couple. What is, and this is one of those foundational questions that's sometimes tough to get an answer to, but it's imperative. What is your client's definition of the problem?
So basically, from the very beginning, the problem is his partner is gambling.
Okay, well, that's not his problem. Okay, but what's his definition of his problem?
Right, and he's being very avoidant about talking about himself.
Right.
So the problem is that he feels let down. He feels like the partner is, and the partner has been cheating on him. So he feels very much depressed, but he doesn't want to. So like today, we talked about underreporting his feelings.
Yeah.
And he has a really hard time seeing himself having a problem. It's always his partner.
Right. So
which
means he's a victim, right?
Right.
And maybe he is. I mean, obviously the spouse or partner of any addict is a victim of the addiction and is affected by the addiction also. But if his problem is that his partner gambles, then the solution is for his partner to stop gambling, which he has no control over.
Right.
So in a sense, he's completely helpless to do anything about his problem.
Right.
And so therefore at that level, I would, and you're probably right in helping this individual address the meaning of money and that sort of thing. But if that's not why he's there.
Right. Although
you see where I'm going with this?
Right.
In other words, our starting point. In other words, here's the principle here, and I'm probably telling us what we already all know, but certainly I need reminding of is that I have somebody in my office sitting on my couch, and there's two questions. One is, what is their definition of their problem, and then what is my definition of their problem, and a lot of times they may not be congruent at all. And if I start working with them on the basis of my definition of their problem, as opposed to starting point, their definition of their problem, then I got to run into all kinds of things that usually I label as resistance on their part or denial or whatever it happens to be. And I'm not saying you're wrong in your definition of their problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how do we find a way through this mess? Or what you're describing as a mess, and by the way, it's a typical kind of mess. I mean, it's what you're describing is. I mean, you may be talking about a specific situation, but you're talking about that which is not uncommon in gambling situations. With spouses, partners, family members, everybody gets so entangled and enmeshed in this thing that it's hard to. It's hard to find a point that says, okay, where do we, where can we jump in here and make a difference?
Right.
So just a couple of initial thoughts. What are you thinking in response to what I'm reflecting back to you?
Well, I think I was trying to cue him into seeing that there are like, I was trying to cue him into seeing what I think the problem is. Okay. But maybe there is another way around that and kind of help him define the problem. He's slowly coming into it. So there was quite a significant amount of time when he wasn't coming to see me because his stepfather was really ill, and he had to go to Portland and stay in Portland. So he came back to me after I hadn't seen him for 5 months. So he came back to me in the last 20 days, and he's come twice. He's starting to open up a little bit more right now, and he's starting to talk about his worries about his financial situation with or without his partner. He sees that he is personally in financial trouble. Because
of his own choice, because of how he deals with money himself separate from his partner?
Yes. We're kind of reaching that point. We're kind of just starting to tap onto that. That's good. Why I gave him some worksheets about budgeting and, just making a list of what the creditors are, and so that he has a little bit more control. But he's starting to really see that maybe there's something that he's not quite getting or understanding about this money situation. But of course, there's a part of him that says, well, but I'm a good money manager. And what he thinks about managing the money is to be able to make a monthly budget. He doesn't see the big picture. He doesn't see that he has these, plane in a hangar, and he doesn't even have a license to fly it. And the idea of having that plane is that he's going to do some cinematography and that he's going to sell pictures, that he takes with the plane. But he doesn't even have the license, and I know the license is worth like $5,000. So that's not, that's a pretty good amount of money. So, and we talked about that too. So,
So here's what here's and I mentioned this earlier, but I think it bears going back. In my experience over the years, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, what I've experienced is that the spouse of the gambler is just as lost in their own fantasy world as the gambler is in theirs. And so that whole page 11 of the G.A. Combo book on the dream world of the gambler also applies to the spouse, partner, family member of the gambler also. Mm-hmm. And what we discover is that almost at a foundational level, we're dealing with a population that is disconnected from reality. So when you talk about the airplane in the hangar and he doesn't even have a pilot's license, my immediate thought is, well, first of all, I mean, there's, I got to confess, there's a degree to which I understand that. I mean, I'm the guy who bought a tractor before I had a farm to put it on. Well, now I got a place, now I got the land. And so some people said, I kind of laughed about that. People say, where'd you buy a tractor before we had a place? Well, because I'm going to have a place. The only difference is this time it wasn't a fantasy. It was a vision that I had that I was implementing. So we always, so it's critical that we discern between fantasy and vision. And I think actually I pulled up, just kind of a reminder, our chart. Are you on video or just audio?
No, I'm on video as well.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So have you heard me present on this this issue, the dream world of the gambler? I mean, does this look familiar at all? Well,
the topic seems familiar, but I don't believe I heard you talk about it.
Okay, so what this is basically is that gambling, oops, I don't know what happened to the size of the chart there, but it's about let me work with this. It's about the escape from reality into a fantasy world. And the fantasy world is the mood-altering experience. In other words, instead of dealing with the reality of what is, because either I believe or I tell myself or I've experienced that either I don't know how or the reality is intolerable, I step up here into a fantasy world where I'm writing the script and everything becomes manageable. Why? Because I'm writing the script and how I feel is dependent upon that. So one of the things you might want to test out, and you can use the airplane as an example of that, or as a vignette to give you a clue of where he is in his head, is if he lights up when he's talking about this whole fantasy. See, here's the thing. If it's a vision and he has a definite plan about how to get there and he's implementing that plan, then that's one thing. But if he's got this idea of doing all this stuff and he's got the airplane in the hangar and he's not taking steps to make that happen, then that's one of the ways that you begin to distinguish between, is this a fantasy or is this vision? Does that make sense?
Oh, this is helping me a lot, because he actually said today, my disconnect lies between me having a great idea, because he feels like he's very creative and he has his business ideas, and being able to take the steps that lead me to achieve that.
Yeah.
So he gave it to, he told me.
Okay, so in that, okay, you're doing great. So what he's telling you, my disconnect is the key word. And so what you want to do is use this, do you have a marker board or a whiteboard or something in your office?
Yes, I do. Yes, okay. I do. Yeah.
Right, so what we want to do is draw this fantasy reality vision, this V chart. And here's what you want to
Okay.
do is you can see it all. You've got a visual of it. And those of you who don't, you guys have heard me speak, you know the fantasy reality vision V chart. If somebody doesn't have it, I sent this to Greta and she can forward it to you. But this is foundational. And this not only applies to the gamblers, but I have discovered,
Right.
again, it almost equally applies to spouses and family members. And this is our starting point.
Mm.
And so
Right.
if you're looking at the chart, and it's beautiful what you just said. He told you, I'm disconnected from reality. Well, how is he disconnected? Right. And you can't see, I don't know if I have a pointer here, but I don't know if you can see this. What he's done is he's created a whole story in his head, which my word for that is fantasy, about how things are going to be. And if you watch him when he's telling you, he's having, I'm certain of this, as sure as I'm sitting here talking to you, he's having a mood-altering experience talking about this sitting in your office.
Mm.
And if you dial in, you can see it on his face. You can see it in how he carries himself. He's lost in this world that is he's having his brain chemistry is altering as he's telling you that.
Right.
What happens then is in the fantasy world, the problem with it is we give ourselves the reward of having done something without even doing it. That's the disconnect that he's telling you about. Now, if you go to the right side of the equation, that if it's a vision, the person who's living in a vision says, this is where I am. Here's the reality of where I am. There's where I want to be. What are the steps that I need to take to make them happen? And am I taking those steps, or am I getting help to take these steps? And so the recovery journey is about moving from fantasy over to vision. Because fantasy is about the escape from reality, the disconnect from reality, whereas vision is grounded in reality. In other words, I'm doing an inventory. I'm saying, okay, here's where I want to be. I want to take pictures from an airplane. What do I need? I need my pilot's license. I need an airplane. I need an airplane to hang that. I need money to fund that. Do I have a plan? And am I executing on that plan to get from here to there? And my guess is, I'm guessing out loud, so you'll have to check this out. I'm guessing what happens is he has what he calls plans, but he can never fully implement them because things get in the way, such as a partner who's gambling or certain other people or whatever it is that's happening. He can't ever get there, which means that in his life, he can't get there because he's a victim of other people and he needs other people to change before he can get there.
Interesting, because he commented about his business partner and how he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, that he's not motivated. And so talking about blaming others, I saw that today. And I did see the mood alteration today when he was talking about this plane and, the hangar and how he bought this little piece of land.
And you saw a big smile on his face or life in his face talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put that piece on pause and go to the other piece. You're also talking about somebody that when he was young, he grew up as a child of gamblers. And he would go to Las Vegas and he would sit while the gamblers in his life played whatever they did. Am I remember that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a part of his, and so what he's done is he's entered a relationship, and in some ways there's a recreation of his childhood. So when he's a child, the question is how much power. And the other question that I was wondering is, was he the one who was made responsible for hanging on to the money? You may or may not this. You may have no clue the answer to this question. I'm just telling you what came to mind. Was he the child who was put in a parental position, and the one who was responsible for hanging on to the money until mom or dad or whoever ran out, and then they'd come to him for more? Was he the one who was supposed to take care of everybody or be responsible for somehow control. I have no clue what the answer to that question is, but does that question make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have not talked about that, but we will next time.
I would absolutely put that,
yeah,
because when you're dealing with somebody that is stuck in these repetitive patterns, and he's told you enough about his childhood, that what I would suggest is for this person, that's really the stuck place to go to. I mean, you want to pay attention to current issues. In other words, this is where we work at multiple levels at the same time. You know, we have to work with current issues, current stressors, and along with that, we want to look at what are these repetitive patterns, or what's the repetition compulsions that people get into, that they keep recreating these same things over and over and over again. And almost invariably, that's rooted in some kind of childhood issues or childhood trauma experiences, whatever, however we want to refer to that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. We talked not today, but last time, the time before, we talked about, what his relationships have been like. And he says, well, I didn't have too many romantic relationships, only 3. Mm-hmm. And he said, but my current relationship, the gambler, is the only person who has been gambling. So he sees that, according to him, I think, trying to think the words he used, but he was saying, well, see, I had 2 other relationships where I had a relationship with non-gamblers, so it's not me. Mm-hmm. So he was really, really resistant to acknowledge that the dynamics of his family of origin impact his relationship right now.
Okay, well, would he at least acknowledge that his family of origin experience impacted his attitudes towards money?
No, he's not. I think I'm getting him there. I think.
Yeah. So the question is, let me interrupt you here for a second. What you want to, I mean, the way you parse that out is by asking, well, when they were playing, what did you do? Who handled the money? You know, you can ask a number of, and it may be a dead end street. There may be absolutely nothing there, right?
Okay.
And so what happens is we have our, we're listening to folks, and I do this all the time. I'm listening, and I'm also paying attention to the questions that pop up for me, both in my guts and my heart and in my head. And I'm not latching onto them as if they're absolutely true, but there's certainly things that I want to notice inside of myself and ask for either some kind of confirmation or validation, or, and I'll often say, I'll preface it, look, I have no idea whether this is true for you. Right? So in saying that, I'm declaring a boundary, that I'm not imposing. Right. I'm telling you right now, this is about me, may have nothing to do with you, but I'll just share with you, here's the question that came to mind.
Okay.
And again, I use that language a lot of times because I want to make sure, look, I want to be clear that I'm not manufacturing, both for myself and for them, I'm not creating a fantasy about your life and imposing it on you and then intervening on that.
Right.
And let me say that again, because to me, that's one of the most important clinical principles. Mm-hmm. We're clinicians. We listen to people. And as we listen to people, we have to, as part of our job is to diagnose. Well, the way we diagnose is by listening. We filter through our experience, what we've learned, what we know. And certainly when I go in to see the doctor, I'm going in and say, here's the symptoms, kind of tell me what's wrong and what we're going to do to fix it. And my expectation is that he does a good job of listening and diagnosing me and appropriately intervening. So on the one hand, we have to do that. But we're also, as clinicians, we're also wanting to know how the individual is diagnosing themselves. And it may not be in a formal way, but that gets at what is their definition of their problem and what is their solution, and is it possible? So I go back around to this guy. What's his definition of his problem? Well, his definition of his problem is his partner's gambling. Okay, so if your partner was not gambling, would you have a problem? You get that? You see the logic in that? If your partner, if your problem is your partner is gambling, and first of all, I might say, well, how is that a problem for you? Well, because he doesn't have any money to pay his part of the bills. Okay, well, I get that, but how's that a problem for you? Well, because I'm having to take money out of my retirement and pay extra taxes on it and to cover his percentage. So, okay, well, you know, do you have unlimited, in other words, is there a certain amount of money? You know, how much, you know, how much is too much, and how long has this been going on, you know?
Right.
And so you really want to, I mean, here's the thing with the problem is and what I've heard myself saying over the years is that I think 85% of our work, and I'm just making up that percentage, but to make a point, 85% of our work is spent trying to help get clarity about exactly what the problem is. And what I would say is the better a job that we do as clinicians in helping the other person, our client, our patient, to find what the problem is, the easier it becomes to arrive at a solution. In fact, it's through our effort to give a name to the problem that the solution oftentimes appears. So we want to spend less time on solution and more time on defining the problem. And so the more questions you ask him about his definition of the problem, the more you're helping him become conscious of himself, and you're leading him in a sense out of victimhood into a place of responsibility. Because he, you know, I can easily imagine a scenario. He said, well, okay, if he stopped gambling, would you have a problem? No. Okay, so how do you help him stop gambling, and how can I, talking to you here in my office, help him stop gambling? Well, you can't.
Right.
Okay, well then what are we doing here? You know?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I've been taking notes. This is really helpful. Yeah, I think that I'm just seeing right now is starting like a little bit of shift in him. Like at the beginning was like, oh, poor me. I mean, the message that he was conveying is, you know, I spent 17 years of my life with this man who is not reciprocating, that he's, you know, reckless with the money. And, yeah, so now he's starting to focus a little bit more on himself and trying to figure out what is really bothering him. And he's the interesting thing is that he doesn't seem distressed about having to think or considering splitting from the partner. Okay. Right. So but he's focusing more on himself. Okay. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're doing some good. If you're helping him move to begin to focus on himself, you're doing some good work.
Oh, thank you.
Because that's the only thing he can do anything about, right?
Right, right.
What we're talking about is taking what you're doing and kind of fine tuning it here.
Right. Okay.
Is that helpful? I mean, it's great to, I mean, because a lot of times we don't often talk about probably enough about the spouse or the partner or family member, and a lot of family members say that they get lost in the middle of all of this. So I love that you're working with and putting the energy you are into a partner. That's awesome.
No, thanks.
I also believe, and I think I said this to you guys, but you know, I mean, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I do more marriage and family therapy with an individual than I do with a couple these days. And I really believe that I do a lot of couples therapy with an individual, because my article of faith is that if you do you different, something different will happen in your relationship. Maybe better, maybe worse, maybe no net change, but something different will happen. I believe that one individual in making the choice to be well for themselves can dramatically impact and affect the health of a relationship. And so there's a way that I do couples counseling with individuals, actually, in situations, and then also see couples together. But if you also think too, there's another term to throw out here that I think we've talked about before, and that is you're seeing somebody who's in a hostage situation. And it's a good word. It's a very relevant word to use because he's in a committed relationship with somebody, and he doesn't want to leave, and he can't really. He has limited control or influence over whether his partner pisses away his resources. And so, what does he do? So there's a degree to which he's stuck. I mean, it's easy to say, "Well, just leave." Well, that.
Right, and he brought up to therapy the issue of him sticking with his partner because they were raising this child, right? So there was a time when he really wanted to split, and well, what's going to happen to the child? Mom cannot have him because of other reasons. Yeah. So what happens if I quit this? What happens to the child? So. Yeah, definitely. And we did talk about the idea of, feeling hostage. And he very much identified with being a hostage of the situation at that time. He doesn't see himself as a hostage right now, although I think he is, but not to the extent where he had to make a choice and he was having to take into account the welfare of the child. Right.
But you've used that word, hostage.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Good. Yes, he liked it.
Because I think it's it. Well, yeah, it's a powerful word that actually is it's relevant. I mean, and it makes a point. So, anybody else listening in have any kind of thoughts, reactions, observations, stir anything? Anybody willing to jump in and say anything? Anybody? Nathan, you there?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm picking on you because I got some names of some people popped up here on my screen, and I could. Is it just for some feedback? Is this kind of discussion beneficial for you, or is it, or not?
It is, and I think it's been covered well. I'm actually the counselor for the gambler partner. But I'm also doing family work with two other family members of counselors or gamblers. And I think that I've made it really a focus of my work with those to really kind of iterate that base foundation of the work that we're doing here in this room is about you as a client. It's your work. The gambler, it's going to affect you and it's going to feed what we do, but this work that we do here is about you.
Yeah. You mean to the family member?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there's, a resounding yes. And I would say, and also, I think we talked about this last time or maybe the time before. I mean, I think I told you guys about this legal case that I was involved with out in California that actually I was just back out there 2 weeks ago, and about somebody who was an attorney who stole a bunch of money into the hundreds of thousands from his stepmother. And she was angry enough that she sued him in civil court. And when I went out for a deposition, she came up to me afterwards and started telling me about what he'd done. And I realized in talking with her or listening to her that for me in my practice is I'm in the trenches so much with people in the midst of crisis that becomes normalized. And I think there's a degree to which I personally can, because the craziness of all of this is more normalized, that I tend to forget the power of the impact and the devastation that the gambling does on spouses and partners. And so that, I think that has to be acknowledged also. And so to your point, the question of spouses and family members, so how do I deal with this? How do I am a victim, how do I deal with what was done to me, but how do I not stay stuck in that victim position? In the midst of being in if it's a marriage or a domestic partnership or whatever, in the midst of being in a legal business financial partnership, which we call a marriage, which means there's a degree to which I'm a hostage. I mean, you guys working with spouses and family members and in these situations, there's a lot of landmines in it at so many different levels. So I applaud you for jumping in the middle of some really difficult work. Anybody else have any thoughts? Danielle, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just thinking, I don't get too many of the spouses to come in, but when they do, it's always interesting to me how they just think that the other person can just stop, and there's nothing that they need to do support-wise. So it's always interesting when they do randomly show up for a session.
Mm-hmm. Do you work with spouses of drug addicts and alcoholics also?
Sometimes, but again, that's also very rare that they come.
Yeah. Do you notice, or does anybody out there notice any difference between spouses? I realize this is maybe a gross generalization, but any difference in the spouses of gamblers or partners of gamblers versus spouses or partners of alcoholics or drug addicts? I'm just curious.
Can you ask that again?
Yes. If you're working with spouses, partners, family members of drug addicts and alcoholics, do you notice any differences between that population and the spouses, partners, family members of gamblers?
Yes.
Okay, what do you notice? What do you notice?
What I've noticed, my first reaction is I haven't seen the degree of, so gamblers, the partners of the gamblers, I think they're more in tune with the fantasy world of the gambler. I think the partners of alcoholics or drug addicts are not as much.
Hang on, hold on one second. What you're saying is important, but we're getting an echo. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Okay, try it again.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is that the partner that I'm seeing, a partner of a gambler, that he shares a lot of that fantasy, that dissociation, that fantasy world, whereas the clients that I see whose partners are using alcohol or drugs, I don't think they share as much of a fantasy world with them. They may be in denial of some things, but I think the prevalence of that fantasy world is, to me, is more evident in the partner of a gambler.
I think you're right. I observe that too. Anybody else have any other thoughts? I mean, there's the other. So there's that disconnectedness from reality. There's the other piece of reality here that in most cases, not every case, but in most cases, and again, this is a generalization, but I think there's some truth in it, is that at least by the time of the spouse of the alcoholic or drug addict, even though they may have some degree of denial, there is some awareness that there's a problem of use, or to use a generalization that is there. What we do with the spouse of the alcoholic is say, quit pouring the booze down the drain. it doesn't work. I mean, stop trying to manage and control their drinking. Again, gross generalization. But I think what's true in the majority of cases with gamblers is the spouses have no clue what's really going on. And if you don't know, that's not denial. Denial is a defense mechanism against that which I know, but I don't want to know, or I can't tolerate knowing. So with the spouses of the gamblers, in many cases, by the time when I see them, they're shell-shocked, or the partners. Is they have no clue. They find out that their husband or their wife or partner has, somehow mortgaged the house up and is being foreclosed on. They didn't see it coming. And so I think the degree of shock is in many cases different in the sense of betrayal. But then there's the other part about that where I've seen many spouses who are also lost in that fantasy world too. And they don't get, they may understand that drugs or alcohol are an addiction, but certainly they look at gambling as something and say, well, just stop. You can control it or you can cut back. And so part of that's an educational piece on our part. What else is going on out in Oregon? Go ahead.
So, Chris, this is Linda.
Wait, start over again. We had that echo from somewhere. Start over.
I've never done this before, and I don't know how to manage it technology.
Maybe turn the volume down on your. No, wait. No, then we can't hear your voice. Okay, hang on. Are you on a computer or an iPad or an iPhone or what?
I'm on my cell phone because I couldn't get you to hear me on the computer.
Okay.
So I see you and hear you on the computer.
Okay, turn the volume off on your computer. And just talk to me on the cell phone. Because I think.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah. Because what was happening is that your phone was picking up my voice on the computer and transmitting, so there was a delay. So we're good. You can hear me, and I can hear you.
I just apologize to all of you guys. I've never done this before, and so I had both things operating at the same time.
All right. Well, so we learned something. That's good. Thank you. Okay. So
right.
go ahead. So who am I talking? Wait, who am I talking to? I don't have my glasses.
Okay, so I'm Linda Grossman. This is my first
Linda.
time to sit in. Hi.
Yeah, great.
But, this is fabulous. I want to thank you so much.
Oh, great.
And what I really liked about the earlier part of your talk was about knowing, you talked about having the client define the problem, but I think what's even most important before that is knowing who the client is, especially when you're sitting in front of the family. And as an ex-consultant, that was a basic thing that I learned in consulting, and I can see that in this situation it's even more important, because when you're sitting in front of the family, you have to always figure out who you're advocating for or who you're counseling. And I have not had to face the family yet. I've been working with gamblers individually. So I just wanted you to know I really appreciate that structure you gave us.
So have you worked with any spouses of gamblers?
No.
Okay, and so you've worked with the gamblers individually, but you haven't done any couples sessions yet.
I have not done any couple sessions, and I'm very nervous about couple sessions.
Why? How come?
Well, I'm sure that once I do it, I'll be comfortable.
Okay.
Because I've been a consultant, I've done a lot of facilitation within groups that were in conflict, that sort of thing. But I'm just getting my certification in gambling, although I've worked with quite a few gamblers in other circumstances, and I have them in my groups. But I've not actually faced an entire family. And I've completed the certification training at this point. So I'm kind of poised on the brink of getting clients. And but I think knowing who the client is and the fact that, from what I understand from the training, it's appropriate to sometimes see family members, the gambler and the spouse, separately. And I think that makes sense to me, because then you can clarify with that person what their view of the problem is without getting into the complex dynamics of having everyone in the same room and trying to do it.
You know, and I mean, it's interesting you saying that, because I seldom meet with a whole family these days. Used to be, and I grew up, you know, I came into the field in 1979, so almost 40 years ago, when all the pioneers and I are in the field of marriage and family, I guess to try and legitimize ourselves and separate ourselves from, you know, psychiatrists or social workers or whatever. You know, we said our ideal was working with the family. You know, when you got the whole family in, that was the goal, to get the whole family in. And, you know, got to the point where there was a degree of impracticality to that. And what I've discovered is that can be beneficial, but it's not always necessary. And it can be absolutely overwhelming in some ways, but it's also wonderful working with the family. I mean, I see a couple of adult daughters with their father, and they've been through a divorce, and it's amazing to get to sit here and be witness to helping some hurting family members talk to their dad about some hurtful things that he's done in a way that maybe he can hear, and you know, and I get to kind of be a witness and nudge things in a direction. So it can be really gratifying, but that can be overwhelming. So I would say my hope is, in your space, do you have the opportunity to see a couple?
I do, and actually how I would envision it working, and I'm just basing this on my experience in consulting, so if I'm wrong, let me know. But what makes most sense to me is that when you're working individually with someone, you can help them define the difference between their fantasy and their vision. And you can help them, and of course what the problem is, help them define the problem in very clear terms, and help them emotionally regulate. And once those things are done for each person, then it would make sense to me that you would meet with the family, and the process would be to help them communicate with each other and negotiate the execution. That's the model I have in my head. I don't know if that fits with what your experience has been.
Well, there's a profound logic in that, and so here's my response to that, is that I mean, I'm saying, yes, everything you're saying is true, and I do that. What is also true alongside of that is that it's important that we stay grounded for us as clinicians. Again, I'm speaking to you guys, but I'm also I keep having to remind myself of this fundamental truth, that gambling is about the lie. Let me say that again. Gambling is about the lie. It's one of the diagnostic criteria, and if somebody's not lying, they don't have a gambling problem. And I don't know, is that my voice feeding back or somebody else's? That may be mine. So somebody, if you're on keep the volume down on your computer if you're listening with another device, because that took care of it. So what I'm aware of when I'm talking with the gambler, I'm talking with somebody who has elevated lying to themselves to an art form. And I'm not talking about conscious, deliberate, intentional, willful, malicious. but I'm talking about somebody who I believe is lost in a fantasy world, which is the world of lies and illusion. And so think in terms of initially, I think, meeting with the couple or having the spouse or partner come in so that you can get some very necessary collateral information. And you may find out that what the gambler is telling you is completely congruent and everything lines up, or you may find out when a spouse or partner comes in that what you're getting is complete bullshit. And that individual is telling you how they would like things to be or how they think things are. Or remember that if you've heard me talk before, one of the things you've heard me say is remember that the best con is the one that's 98% true. What that simply means is that everything that you're hearing and everything that you're being told is absolutely true. It's just that there's a small little part of this that's being left out that if you knew that piece would alter the whole landscape. And right now I can't give you an example of that off the top of my head, but any of you who've been working with gamblers for a long period of time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the best con is the one that is 98% true. So we're dealing with the lie. And I'm not calling the gambler a liar, because that implies some kind of willful, deliberate, malicious intent to deceive. And I'm not saying that that's not true in some cases. But in my experience, it's not a fully conscious process. And so I need two things. I'm listening for congruence. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm filtering it through everything I know and everything I've learned, but I'm listening also to how congruent you are in the story you're telling me about yourself. And that's what I mean by internal congruence. I need external information in order to verify the story that you're telling me to make it congruent externally. And I'll give you an example of this. I do a fair amount of legal work as testifying as an expert in legal cases. And it's interesting, when I do an evaluation of somebody, I never even talk to them until after I've gotten a bunch of written information from them. For example, I'll send them the Gamblers Anonymous 20 questions, and I'll ask them to write out a paragraph or multiple paragraphs in answer to each question. I'll ask them to write out a narrative of their gambling history for me, and in what they're telling me, I'll look for incongruence, and then I'll email them back some additional questions for them to fill in the blanks. And as a practical matter, by the time I have that information, and by the way, by the time I have the legal complaint against them and whatever other legal records and documentations there is, I can basically write a forensic report without ever even talking to the person. So I really end up talking to the individual in these cases simply by clarifying a few issues. So it's a long-winded way of saying we can never get too far removed from the fact that the gambling addiction is about the lie. I mean, it's about a lot of things. And the person we lie to the most is ourselves, and part of our journey and our task is to help them give a name to their own truth, such that then their truth confronts their lie. And in order to do that, a lot of times I use the spouses and family members to help us get to what's really true. So does that make sense?
It does, and it makes perfect sense. And I want to make sure that, because I'm taking notes as you're talking, okay. So you say that some of these tools that you use include the Gamblers Anonymous 20 questions and a narrative of the gambler's story in their own words. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I would have. I mean, if you can get it, have them take. They may not be going to Gamblers Anonymous because it may not be around there, but get a copy of the Gamblers Anonymous 20 questions.
Right.
And ask them to do some written work. Now that does several things. And a lot of people say, well, I'd rather just tell you. Well, yeah, and we all know that, in most treatment processes, I I'm sure this is still true, we have people do a written first step, how it was, you know, your history, and people say, well, I instead of writing it, I'd rather just tell you. Well, I know you would, but what happens is there's something different when we write something down. Because if I write something down on a piece of paper, now that's me. It's like me looking in a mirror. So it's me confronting me. And we want to help the people we're working with confront themselves.
Right. I think that's a great idea.
Them, right? So have them do a written narrative, and then you look at it and ask yourself, wait a second, does this make sense? Now, along the way, the other principle that's critical here is that you not fill in their blanks for them. When a gambler, and this is kind of back to what I refer to as my gambling kind of 101 training for clinicians, is it's necessary that we be conscious of the story we're telling ourselves about our patient. Which it's okay to tell yourself a story, that's part of under the heading of diagnosis. But do not mistake the story you're telling yourself about your patient with your patient. Because oftentimes we begin intervening on our story, mistaking it for the patient. That means we're
theirs, that's right.
That's right, we're imposing our fantasy world on them.
That actually really makes a lot of sense, because I remember in a previous residential treatment facility I worked in, one of the first steps was to have participants write their story, and it was really, really powerful.
Yes.
That they would read their story out loud.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you need it or not, but I'll do it anyway. I give you, if you can do it in your structure, I give you permission and encouragement actually to bring the spouse or family member in sooner rather than later, and look at it maybe not necessarily as couples therapy. In fact, I wouldn't even look at it as couples therapy. I would frame it as you bringing this individual in to provide you with collateral information to help you help your client, your patient.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Which I think is different from doing couples therapy. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not real sure, but I think it kind of is.
Okay.
And by the way, what you will find in some cases is the gambler does not want their spouse in at all. And then don't you think that raises some questions?
Right. I noticed, I run a DBT group with a couple gamblers in it, and I was doing the Eureka as part of, it's a change group, and I was doing the Eureka as midway into the group. They'd already had it once at the very beginning, a shortened version of it, and they had never gotten any feedback on it. It's just part of our intake process, and I was using the full-blown Eureka as part of the group process in the middle to give them a sense of where they were in the change process and to get them to talk about how they felt about it. And one of the suggestions I made was that if they felt comfortable, they could share their thoughts with their spouse. And I noticed the gamblers going, oh, no, we don't want to make things worse.
Right. No, don't go there.
No. I thought, okay, that's too soon. Just forget about that.
Now you're getting personal. That's hitting way too close to home.
That's right. I can't perform anymore in the group.
No. You don't understand. I've told them a story, and I've got him or her right where I want them, so don't go messing with that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, which obviously gives you, and that's what I mean is there are stories being told, and it could. I mean, a lot of times what I experience, again, it's in most cases it's not malicious. It's self-protecting, and it's there's something different than happens when your patient tells you about what they've done and how they've maybe hurt their spouse. It's very different sitting in there with the spouse telling the gambler how they hurt them in front of you. In the first case, I can keep myself arm's length from my own shame because I'm controlling the narrative.
Right.
But when my spouse is there telling me in front of somebody else, it makes it harder to manage and keep everything at an arm's length. And that's the other thing about gamblers is this part of the great disconnection is from one's own body and one's own affect. You know, what says oftentimes gamblers, at least the old timers would kind of take their head off their shoulders and put it aside. Remember, there's the poker face. The poker face, which I think applies to most gamblers, whether they play poker or not. It's about the ability to shut down or to disconnect from the head down, from their body,
right.
Even to the extent of, we know all the stuff, people who play the machines disconnected from their bodily needs. You know, they go for hours without going to the bathroom, or they'll wear Depends in and pee in their pants. They're playing the machines, or they don't take their insulin, or whatever happens. So there's or they don't eat, don't drink. So there's a gross disconnection in the midst of gambling from one's own physical body. And so if we know that, then anything that we can do to help them connect, and sometimes your best friend to help somebody connect is somebody that has been hurt by their gambling, and they are not going to want to go there. And I don't force them to. I can say, well,
right.
So if your wife was here, if your partner was here, if your husband was here, what would they say or do that would be a problem for you here in this office? So you can play into that without actually going there and find out more of what's really going on. But remember, the underlying this again is we're dealing with the lie, and so the antidote for the lie is the truth. Well, where's the truth? Well, a lot of times we don't know what it is. We just know that we don't know it. But if we stay with it, and if they stay with it, it will emerge.
Right.
Oh, that's great stuff. Thanks for bringing that up. That's really helpful. Anybody else out there listening, stir any thinking, any thoughts, any energy? How many of you out there, just kind of change the subject, how many of you out there were at the conference, national conference in Portland last year? Linda, were you there?
No, I was not.
I think you were. Okay. All right. I know, Greta, you were. I don't know.
I was, I think. Yep.
Okay.
I was also.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there was the reason I mentioned there's a very, very special friend of mine that in the field we lost this week, a guy named Rob Hunter. Rob was, I first met Rob in 1990 when he was Rob was a psychologist in Las Vegas, and he specialized in treating gamblers. He was one of, if you guys have ever heard the term, the crack cocaine of gambling, it kind of gotten popularized. And really it was referring to video poker machines. Rob was the one who came up with that term. Rob worked with Dr. Custer, who's the man who originated treatment for gambling addiction. He was my doctor back in 1987 at Taylor Manor Hospital in Baltimore. And I met Rob in 1990 at Charter Hospital in Las Vegas, and we became good friends and presented together a number of times. Rob died this last week in Las Vegas. And so what's happening in this field is that a lot of the pioneers, the people that I've grown up with for the last 30 years are dying, and it's tough to experience it. But Rob was one of those amazing people. Anyway, the reason I asked you about Portland, Rob was there. You know, he was a big guy with white hair, and you know, always a smile and a great disposition. So our field lost one of the giants this week, and it's a huge loss. I don't know if he was ever out in, I don't know if he ever did any training out in Oregon or not. I don't recall. But
I'm curious about, what do you see the big questions for those of us who are entering the field and really want to make a contribution and want to learn about things to add to the field? What do you think the big questions or most pressing questions are for us right now in gambling addiction?
Okay, so one of the reasons I mentioned Rob is because Rob was not a gambler. You know, I'm you know, because I was a clinician and then developed my own gambling problem. In the early days, I was one of the first people in the field that was both a clinician and a recovering gambler. So it gave me a bit of a unique perspective. And Rob was not, and Bob Custer. Let me answer your question by telling you a story that applied to both Rob and to Bob Custer. Is that the very first gambling treatment program started in Brecksville, Ohio, in the 1970s, and Dr. Custer was director of the drug and alcohol program at the Brecksville, Ohio Veterans Administration Hospital. He was approached by members of Gamblers Anonymous who said, "Dr. Custer, we have people in our program who seem to need more than what we can offer." I don't run into that many wise people in GA like that these days, but his response, and I remember him telling me this, it floored me. I mean, this was a man who was very, very well versed, an addiction specialist, and his response was stunning. He said, "Look, I know drugs and I know alcohol, but I don't know gambling. But if you will teach me, then maybe I can help." Hunter had that same spirit. And he would always, when he and I were printing, he said, "Look, I don't know, Chris, you've been there. What have you know, let me give you my observation from the outset." So I think more than a question, I mean, there's a lot of great questions that I could give you and concerns, but I think it's more of an attitude. If you're coming into the field, know what you know, but also know what you don't know. Because I think this is true in many cases, that when you meet with the gambler, there's an initial wager, and usually it's not conscious, but it goes like this. Are you sharp enough to see through my bullshit and help me give a name to it? Because if you're not, you can't help me. I need to know that you're sharp enough to see through my bullshit so that you can help me. Now, the problem with that is, initial wager, with you, the clinician, is that you may not know. You may not have the experience. I mean, I got a lot of years. I mean, I can sniff out the stuff, and you know, a lot of times I don't even have to think about it. But here's what Rob did to deal with that initial wager. I mean, he had a funny way of doing it. He said, "Look," and everybody's got to come up with their own thing, but he said, "Look, you know, I'm too old and I'm too tired and I've been around too long, and I really don't have the energy to figure out whether or not what you're telling me is the truth or not. So what I'll do is just accept that everything you're telling me is true, and we'll go from there. And if it's not my life, it's your life. So let's jump into the middle of this." Now, there's a real paradoxical clinical intervention in that, because basically what you're doing is you're calling the person a liar and a bullshitter without calling them a liar and a bullshitter. So first of all, you're naming their bullshit. So you've passed the first test in doing that. And the second is acknowledging the truth that says, okay, you can lie to me, you know, but if you want to do that, hell, it's your time and your money. And I'm not going to spend any energy trying to figure out whether you are or aren't, which kind of conveys that, hey, this guy's sharp enough to give a name to this. So maybe they know something. And that was Rob's way of dealing with that. So I'm answering your question by first proposing to you that there's an attitude. And the attitude is one of humility, because, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't know a lot about gambling. I know a hell of a lot about gambling addiction, but you know, I know a lot about options trading in the markets. I don't know about playing blackjack. I don't know about playing slot machines. I don't know about handicapping a horse race. I've never seen a highlight match. Never played a video poker game. I don't know anything about it. I mean, I know something about it because I've learned. But you know, if you're with a gambler, they could fill an encyclopedia with their knowledge about gambling, but that's not what they need help with. They need help with the fact that they have a problem with what they know so much about, or they're supposedly an expert with. And so our posture is one of, if you will teach me about you, then maybe I can help you. So our greatest intervention is one of developing a constant, steady stream of clarifying questions, which is, wait a second, I don't understand. Can you clarify that? What do you mean? What's the problem? Well, how is that a problem? Well, yeah, I get that, but I'm still not understanding exactly how that's a problem for you. Okay, so your partner gambles. How's that a problem for you? Well, he's not contributing to his half of the finances. Okay, well, okay, but how is that a problem for you? Well, I have to go borrow money. Well, can you borrow money? Yeah. Well, how's that a problem? Well, because I don't want to. Yeah, but if he's gambling the money away and you want to pay the electric bill, then you got to go borrow the money in order to pay the electric bill. So again, what's the real problem here? You know, help me understand so that I can help you. And the reason I'm asking you all these crazy questions is because I want to make sure that I'm real clear on what the problem is. And so it's really more of an attitude, and you'll learn, in other words, the person you're working with, if we're doing a good job of listening as professional listeners, then the person we're working with will teach us how to help them. How's that for a long-winded answer to a short question?
Well, it was a great answer because it defines what we should be doing in the counseling process, but it didn't really answer my question.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give you, so ask your question. No, well, it's not okay. So ask your question again and I'll get more specific.
Okay. So in going through all of the training that's provided so far in working with gamblers, we go over all kinds of things. We go over, what are the stages of change, and what is the process that the gamblers go through at each stage of change. And we've gone over the concepts of how you work with families. And my question really had to do with, what are the next big things that we don't know? If we know all those things, what are the next big, so it has less to do, I get the whole idea of entering the counseling relationship with, as a listener and not an expert. And I mean, you pretty much have to do that when you're dealing with any of the addictions, because it really is the client's issue, not yours. And so you can't take that burden from them. But mine really had more to do with, in the field, what is it we don't know? Is it more about the neuroscience? Is it more about the nature of the fantasies they have? And that's really what I'm curious about.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can give you a real system. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, I'm rewinding all my years of doing this, and I will tell you that I think probably one of the most critical questions is why are you here now? And so then a corollary of that question is, what is the crisis or crises in your life that result in you making a decision to be here now? Now, some of the specific questions that I want to know has to do with money, and that is, who do you owe How much do you owe? Who knows about that? What is going on that you're afraid that somebody might find out? Is that getting specific enough?
Yeah.
In other words, the gambler, in my experience, and this is a generalization, but I think it's true, is not going to seek help as long as they have the fantasy of the way out. It's when they've stolen some money that they don't know how to put back, when they're afraid that their spouse may find out that they've taken out a home equity loan, or, there's some kind of crisis.
So it sounds like what you're saying is, as a clinician, the thing that you would like to have a better understanding about is what motivates somebody to engage in treatment to begin with.
Well, yeah, but I would even get more, yes, but I would get even more specific of that is why now? What's true now? And in my case, and you guys may not deal with this as much out in Oregon, but it's rare that I see somebody who doesn't have some kind of financial crisis going on that they cannot figure out a way out. And so their definition of their problem is not that they have a gambling problem, but they have a problem with this guy that they borrowed money from, who's demanding it be paid back, and my mother doesn't know about it, or my spouse doesn't know about it, and I'm all jammed up. So again, that gets back to what's that individual's definition of the problem. But always remember that this is an addiction about money. It's about a pathological relationship with money. And so right up at the front, it's necessary that we ask financial questions. It's rare, and I've had people come in with gambling problems who on paper don't have financial problems because of their gambling, but they have spiritual or emotional problems. But I will tell you that that's rare. It's the financial problems that have been created by gambling and losing, and then what's the downstream problems from there. So that's a very critical, clear starting point that transcends stages of change. I mean, it includes that, but in our stages and progression of the gambler, it's what brings you in now, and what I know is that it's connected to money and crises around money. And the belief is, if I can solve that problem, then I'm good to go. I don't really have a gambling problem. I have a financial problem. So what's the nature of your financial problem? How did you get there? Is that clear?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, you had a little bit of a question mark in your response.
Well, I think that I'm research oriented. So that question really had more to do with, if I was to do a PhD in this field, what would be some of the things that I might want to pay attention to in order to add to the field. So it was a different question than a question about doing clinical work. But I think what you gave me, which was really useful, was you basically said to me that as a clinician, what you need to have a better understanding of is all the motive for seeking treatment, right, and the downstream patterns of problems that occur as a result of the gambling addiction. And that's good enough. I think that's a great, that's why you may have heard
current, present, real life problems.
Exactly. And I think that's what you're basically saying is we need to have a better picture of this. And I think, so it wasn't really a question mark in my voice as much as you just didn't give me what I expected, but it was still useful.
Okay. And I would say that as a researcher, then that is a primary research topic for you as a clinician with the gambler, the very first session. And in a bigger picture, it's a great topic to do some research on is what's going on with gamblers when they come in for treatment? Why do they come in for treatment when they come in for treatment? That's a very legitimate research question.
And what that said to me is, even with all the years that you've had in the field, you still have questions about that. So it's worthwhile exploring. So that really wasn't a question mark in my mind.
Gotcha.
It was more of a processing sound.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for jumping in and putting yourself out there. It's a lot more fun for me to do that, and I think beneficial. talk. So we're out of time. So hopefully we will get to be with each other a month from now on the second Tuesday in April. Take care of yourselves. Great session. Thank you all. Bless all of you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay. All right.